Good morning, everyone. We're going to call this 15th meeting of the Special Legislative Committee on Bill C32 to order. Because of the votes today, we have a little bit of a change in plan, but in terms of our first panel here, they understand that they're going to have a total of 15 minutes. We will then follow that up with one round of 7 minutes each. In the second one, there'll be 5 minutes for each of the groups, plus one 7-minute round. We're going to do our best to try to get this done by 1 o'clock, but I understand the room is available. With unanimous consent, we might have a few minutes extra. Mr. Del Mastro.
Mr. Chairman, why don't we simply add, like there's 20, we've lost 24 minutes of the committee. We've got some very important witnesses on this panel and the next panel. They've taken time out of their schedule to be here. I think it's reasonable for this committee to suggest that we'll sit until 1:24 and at least provide the 2 hours that was originally scheduled.
Okay, are you moving that?
I'd like to move that motion.
Okay, discussion, Madame Lavallee.
Well, I have nothing against sitting to 1:24, but the general idea here is, well, there are many of them, the first group and the second group, so the main idea here really, if they don't feel really that they'll be able to get the message across, perhaps we have to ask them to come back and put their presentation to us in detail at that point.
Let's try to get to...
Unfortunately, Mr. Chair, I have a meeting at 1 o'clock. However, having said that, given that we have a lot of witnesses, these are very important witnesses. The witnesses for the first hour and the second hour are very important. I think that they should be brought back if we think it's necessary to do so.
Move to start them. Mr. Del Mastro, quickly.
Obviously, there'd be no votes or motions. If you have to leave at 1 o'clock, you leave at 1 o'clock. But this whole notion that we're just going to keep bringing people back, I mean, when are we going to get to consideration of the bill? I'd like to get to consideration. I'd like to get through the witness list and get to consideration of the bill someday. Someday. I think the witnesses would like to see us get to consideration of the bill someday. So, I mean, to suggest we'll just keep bringing witnesses back because everybody's got such a busy schedule that they can't possibly fit it in. It's getting a little outrageous, Mr. Chairman. So let's just sit to 1:25.
I'm going to call a vote on the motion. Call the vote on the motion. All in favor? To extend by 24 minutes. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
To be on the record.
Opposed?
I understand my colleague's frustration. I'm certainly willing to meet. My problem is that I have committed. We have question period. I have a meeting. If they want to meet at any time to talk about improving the process of committee, I've said all along I'm open to meeting. But I can't do it.
Okay.
We weren't expecting this. I'm sorry.
There's 5 in favor. Opposed to extending by 24 minutes. I don't receive. Okay, so we're going to go to 1 o'clock. So let's get this meeting underway. Mr. Garneau.
So I just want to make a comment in reply to Mr. Del Maestro, who's talking about how we're sort of going on and on and on. I just want to say for the record that we in the Liberal Party have spoken to Mr. Moore, who of course is the Minister of Heritage, and indicated to him that we are ready to discuss the possibility of speeding things up, on condition that the Conservative Party removes the ad that it plays at the moment that talks about an iPod tax. If they're ready to take that out of their broadcasting to show how serious they are, then we're prepared to discuss things more seriously about speeding up the process.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to move to our witnesses. Well, Mr. Del Mastro, quickly.
I just point out to Mr. Garneau there's 2 new ads that we're now running. He can check them out on conservative.ca, both excellent.
Thank you very much. We will start with Mr. Graham Henderson.
No.
Is this a point of order, Mr.
Yeah,
Rodriguez?
just the last point of order regarding also Mr. Del Mastro comments. The fact is that there was too many witnesses today, so I want that to be noticed, okay? And you know that, Mr. Chair, no more than 3, and that's why some of them should have the chance to come back, that's all.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Henderson.
I had some general introductory remarks, but I think that there's people here that are more important to be heard from than my general remarks, so I'm going to let us just start right off with Maya. You all have biographies, so we're skipping bios. They're in French and English, I believe, that have been circulated for you. Maya?
Hello, bonjour. I'm here speaking as a Canadian songwriter, recording artist. The music industry as it existed 15 years ago, in my experience, is dead. The internet has been an obvious game changer, and we have gained amazing things from this invention, and yet business and government seem to have failed to keep up with the pace of the internet revolution. The music industry is crumbling under the weight of illegal downloading. Those who still peddle the pros of BitTorrent sites and the like have fallen behind on the narrative of those in the know. And those in the know are people like myself who are directly and painfully affected by the velocity of events. I'm a songwriter and musician who has poured endless energy, sweat, and passion into my life's work. Our band released our first record on a major label in Canada this past year. When Shania Twain released her first album, as an example, she sold about 50,000 copies, which is an average yet modest sales figure for an emerging artist, backed by good marketing, advertising, and distribution support in a healthy market. That was then. Today, my band has this same support, and we are in the middle of a tour playing to sold-out 400-seat rooms, yet sales of our CDs total less than 5,000 copies. 2 weeks after its release, our album was available on every BitTorrent and downloading site and was ripped for free countless times. Our mechanical royalties earned to date from record sales have amounted to just over $4,000, and that's split amongst 4 members. Added to touring revenues for in excess 150 shows played this year and excess revenue from being a musician, my personal yearly income will still be less than $15,000. Yet I work an average of at least 40 or 50 hours each week. And let me tell you, I'm not alone. The list of famous Canadian musicians and songwriters, my friends, my peers, whose work is known and cherished by fans, but who can no longer make a living from their life's passion, will come as a shock to most people in our country. Illegal downloading has stripped us of our main source of income and therefore our livelihood. In a free market economy, consumers can choose whether or not to purchase a product. They do not have a right to take it without permission. That's why I see downloading as nothing less than theft, and we need laws to protect our rights as workers. We have a wonderful national musical heritage, one blessed with the likes of Neil Young, Joni Mitchell, Bruce Cockburn, to name a few. Our musicians, our songwriters, and artists of all genres, in fact, make up a large part of the Canadian brand. Taking the example of Arcade Fire, my fellow Montrealers, who won big at this year's Grammy, music forms a large part of our Canadian identity abroad, and this identity is built in large part on the work of these artists. These artists will reward us, all of us, if given the opportunity. At the very least, I believe they deserve fair treatment under the law. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to John Paul Ellison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm here as the chair of the Canadian Council of Music Industry Associations, and I think a little explanation about what those are may be in order. Quebec does not have an MIA, and in Ontario there is one in Northern Ontario, but not in Southern Ontario. MIA, there are 10 of them across the country, every province plus the Yukon, plus Northwest Territories is in the midst of forming one. What an MIA is a provincially incorporated non-profit corporation by which, funded almost entirely by the respective provincial governments. It's their way of putting money into the music industry. As non-profits, our role is not to make money, so to speak, but rather what we do most is provide professional development opportunities for our members. On the question of members, we have on any one time about 5,000 registered members, but that number is actually quite higher, much higher, because most of us allow band memberships where one person in the band can buy a membership and all 4 or 5 can actually access our services. So we do professional development. Some of us provide pro bono legal services. We do a lot of representation to our provincial governments for advocacy. And in that sense, we are the representative of the average person on the street that just wants to do an album for the first time. Once we develop them to a certain point, then you'll see other people, or other groups, sort of take on the higher development of their careers. With respect to the Act itself, I'm here to say, contrary to what some people may have told you in the past, that it does have a tremendous effect on the street from coast to coast to coast. and here's why. I think you can look at the current strategic plan from my organization, which is Saskatchewan Music. We have a very lofty goal this year in our strategic plan, and that is to bring our artists in Saskatchewan from their average annual income of $8,000 up to poverty line. That's our strategic long-term goal, and we don't know if we can make it. So every decision on this bill affects the person on the street. We do have specific positions on certain provisions, but in the interest of time, they are in my written submissions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll move to Grant Dexter from Maple Music.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address the committee today. I'll start by stating that we absolutely need this bill. I come here as a constituent of the independent music community, speaking on behalf of Canadian-owned companies involved in every aspect of music, sound recording, and music-related industries. And I can tell you without a doubt, we have been severely impacted by piracy. That is why copyright reform is crucial. However, Bill C32 is not without its weaknesses. As you have heard from many witnesses, the technical drafting does not in some cases meet what it sets out to do. As an example, Minister Clement has said time and time again, Bill C32 targets the wealth destroyers. But the way it's written, the ISO hunts of this world will not be effectively brought to justice. In many cases, the language of the bill is simply too broad to effectively meet its objectives. For instance, the enabling provisions, the single most important aspect of the bill to target the wealth destroyers, are written in a way that will surely allow ISO Hunt off the hook. I cannot imagine that is what the minister intended. You have a one-page summary of our key recommendations, but I'd like to highlight a few. Bill C32 needs to separate the bad guys from the good guys, providing the good guys with safe harbor, but not giving the bad guys refuge. The definition of these enablers must be tightened up so we can catch them, and the penalties must be high enough to deter them. As the Liberals have stated, the statutory damages need to be commensurate with the severity of the infringement. Currently, they provide little or no deterrent to theft. The making available right contains a fatal flaw which would require rights holders to file a tariff or get permission from the minister in order to exercise their rights. This cannot have been the intention. An earlier version of the copyright reform did not contain this flaw, and therefore it is easily fixed. The user-generated content provision is written so broadly, individuals could post the entire Maple Music catalog of music and have a simple top and tail to qualify. Maple Music is the best. All of our content. Isn't this great? And this law would allow them to do that. The private copying exemption is also very broad. While we do not object to consumers making copies of legally purchased music to their hard drive or iPods, the minister cannot have intended the iPod to become a filling station for the neighborhood. This must be limited to reproduction of legal copies within their own household. And finally, the same limit to legally purchased copies in the confines of the household can be said for time shifting. The best outcome we can hope for is the restoration of a legitimate marketplace for creative products. With minor changes to avoid unintended consequences, Bill C32 provides the copyright reform that is so desperately needed by the independent music sector of Canada. Thank you.
Much. We'll move to Lorena McKennett from Quinlan Road Limited.
Thank you for the opportunity to meet you this morning. I'd like to restrict my comments to 4 points. Firstly, I would like to commend this government for the bill which they have presented. I believe with few exceptions they have identified and achieved the main principle of this whole debate, the need to protect the content creators and copyright holders. That the job to be done now is to finesse the language of what is intended, knowing that it can be tweaked through the course of time and to get this bill passed without further delay. The situation at the coalface is dire. Secondly, I am deeply disappointed with those vocal few who continue to frame this discussion as one which only affects major labels and who are driven by interests from across the border. I can attest that as an independent artist with my own label who has worked with a vast ecosystem of Canadian suppliers for over 25 years, that this is not the case. I would suggest that the true commercial interests behind the scenes, who are playing a detrimental role in this issue, are largely the enablers. They would include the BitTorrents, ISA-hunts, the new global media entities such as YouTube, or even the constituency of ISPs who pretend to be neutral in this matter. I believe the ISPs and the website owners should most certainly play a significant role in the management of that content which passes through their hands and be accountable for that. This must be true not only for copyright purposes, but surely for other matters such as pornography, privacy, and fraud. After all, it is these companies who are making their profits off the eyeballs which are driven to their site to access illegal content. Thirdly, due to the urgency of this bill, I would urge this committee not to get diverted on the matter of levies, which is not even in this bill. I have taken account of what this means in real terms to me, and it represents approximately or less than 1% of my income. For most other artists, this would hardly come close to a meaningful income stream. And in no way should a levy be considered a substitute for an artist having the tools to produce income from their work. But rather, what is important, and especially for those starting out, is that their works are properly protected and not pirated and exempted at every corner. Fourthly, it is important to understand that everything can be accomplished within the framework of permissions. One need not tie themselves in knots, trying to carve out exemptions for this and that. The default of all positions should be that the content creator's rights over the control and intention for their work should be fundamental. And if there are those who either for commercial or charitable or educational purposes wish to use music, they can simply request that use. My small label, which prides itself in customer service, successfully issues hundreds of permissions each year. This courteous and rightful practice is already in motion and simply needs clarification in legislation. Most importantly, it is essential that some sort of protection is achieved immediately, and that any Made in Canada solution is harmonized with other international territories and reflects our commitments. The creative communities around the world, not only in Canada, are relying upon us to finally do our part.
Okay, we're sitting at about 12 minutes. I think we agreed that this group would get 15, so if there's about 3 minutes remaining. If any of the witnesses want to add a little more. No? Okay. Thank you very much. We'll move to the first round, or the only round of questioning, and we'll go to Mr. McTeague for 7 minutes.
Chair, do I get an extra 3 minutes? Witnesses, thank you for being here and for your very helpful commentary at a very critical juncture, and the timing, I suspect, could not be better. Open-ended questions I have for all of you here, so just choose to come forward, whoever should want to answer. But this Bill C32 would place a cap on statutory damages of $5,000 for all claims of right holders where the infringement is deemed to be for non-commercial purposes. In your opinion, what effect would this change have on the actions of members of the public? Do you think, I think some of you have opined on this section actually needs amendment? If so, you want to specify that? Mr. Ellison?
Prior to the music business, I spent 20 years as a civil litigation lawyer, so these damages are quite interesting to me. When I quit private practice of law about 3 years ago, when somebody came into my office and said I wanted to sue somebody, on average, I would quote them between $30,000 and $45,000 to do a 2-day Queen's bench trial, 12 to 18 months, and I asked for $5,000 up front before I did anything. The statutory damages, to lower them down to $5,000, in effect what's going to happen is you might as well do away with them entirely, because the public, or whoever, it could be for profit as well, say, I mean, nobody's going to sue us because it's not worth it. We'll just keep doing it. You're basically giving them a blank check to just continue doing it.
Ms. McKenna?
My feeling is that once a bill is established and the public is educated in what it's set out to do, that most Canadians seek to be law-abiding. And so that I think that, like my colleagues suggest, is that one must set out penalties in such a way that those who are driving for commercial interests are not able to do that with impunity.
if the goal is to provide flexibility here to judges to take private purposes into account, I think that's what the concern is. A good way to do this would be to leave the statutory damages provision exactly as it is, but to make infringement for private purposes a special case under Section 381(3), which would let judges reduce the damages to 0 if it was appropriate.
You've submitted that as a recommendation, Mr. Anderson. Question number 2, and I'm going to have to go very rapidly. There are some that would argue that in today's digital environment, Internet service providers must play a role in helping them to stem copyright infringement. Now, as you know, Bill C32 implements a notice-on-notice approach, a regime, if you will. In your view, is this in fact sufficient? Is it enough? Do you think ISPs and search engines are in fact getting a free ride under the bill?
We don't feel that that's the notice and notice has any teeth to it, because all it does is we as copyright holders, we would go to the ISPs and then they would inform whoever's violating, and that's not strong enough. Again, as Graham said and as Lorena said, we don't want to sue our own customers or go after the people that buy our music. We're going, like the folks that are commercially stealing our copyrights, we need stronger weapons than a notice and notice. That's not going to do anything. It's not going to change anything for us.
Anyone else?
I think also it must be borne in mind that that it takes time to do this process, and that the speed at which digital information travels now, and that you can incur an incredible amount of damage without having a swifter and more severe remedy. Okay. And I think it does also goes back to the default that the copyright holders should have that their rights should be deferred to.
Okay.
ISPs should be required to implement a policy that would deal with repeat infringers.
Chair, how much time do I have?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. Well, I've got 2 more, then I think we're just under the wire. I'll try to do this as best as I can. We've been told time and time again on this committee that the UGC provision of user-generated content exception is open-ended, and that it might be subject or might have unintended consequences. From your perspective, what can be done in this legislation to improve or this amendment or this legislation?
I do want to address on that issue something that, from what I've read, may not have been brought to your attention on this. Most of the discussion around this is on the financial consequences of this, but there's for our members, much more important point, and that is the moral rights issue, the right of integrity of the work, in the sense that, yeah, there's financial consequences, but what if an artist writes a wonderful song about their cat, and all of a sudden somebody takes a film of a cat being killed or tortured or something and uses that song and puts it up there? That's the right of integrity. For most of my members, they won't ever have a hit song. They play wedding socials, they play in bars on Friday nights, but they write songs. Okay. And it's the right of integrity that keep that in mind on this issue.
How do you write that in?
It's in there now. It's moral rights. You got moral rights in the current act.
All right. Did you? Final question then, in the minute or so that I have here. There are exceptions that permit the circumvention of technical protection measures, the TPMs, and there is flexible means of adding. Is there, in your view, any way in which we can add a more flexible approach to this legislation if it is required? It's obviously a serious flashpoint for a number of us, but it does require at least some dexterity on your behalf to try to provide us and cobble together what might be an alternative or a compromise that might make all satisfied, if such a thing can ever happen.
If I could just quickly answer, I think that often it is forgotten that there are a slew of exceptions that are already built into the legislation, and also lost in the discussion is the fact that there is a power to make regulations. And if down the road someone has an issue relating to a TPM, there's nothing to stop them under the existing, and you could tighten it up if you wanted, but it's there. Appeal to the Governor and Council, make your case, and then if there's merit to it, then a new exception could be created. So I think that that's there, and I think that there's a lot of exceptions that have already been built in that cater to some of the issues that have come before us.
Okay, we'll wrap up. We'll move to Madame Lavallee for 7 minutes.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Dexter, you provided us with this document, right?
Yeah.
So changes to C32, and it's signed by you. So there are 14 changes that need to be made to C32, in your opinion, right? That's what you're saying. That's what you're suggesting. That's what I seem to have understood from your text. There are some of these that are major. You suggest the elimination of the exemption for UGC. You also suggest to increase the exemptions for ephemeral recording, and you also mentioned that there should be no ceiling to statutory damages. That's just some of them. There are others. My question is the following. Do you think that C32 in its current state, its current form, could be adapted, that it would do the job, that it would stop illegal downloading?
It's a great start for our community. I think with a few small changes and tweaks that we could get a bill that our constituents would be thrilled with. And I think everyone is willing to work with the government to do what's ever necessary, because I can tell you one thing, without the bill, we're in big trouble. The industry in 1999 was almost $1.2 billion in sales. We're probably down to about $430, $420 million this year, and we're in real trouble. We're not creating future stars. The bus rental companies are all going bankrupt. The recording studios are all going bankrupt. So we think this is a great start, and we're happy to work with the government, with all governments, to make the bill a little bit better and protect ourselves.
The changes that you're asking for, they're substantial changes. I hope you realize that. Now, let's say we don't make these changes, that we adopt C32 as it stands. Now, would this bill do the job in its current form? Would it be effective, let's say?
I believe there will be some changes to the bill, so I'm not going to say that the current bill, because I think that there is will on behalf of the government to represent its citizens, and I think there will be changes, and I think we're going to end up with a great bill.
Mr. Henderson, would you like to react? Do you think we could adopt C32 in its current state and it would be effective to tackle illegal downloading? And would it provide revenue, income to artists that deserve it, of course?
My sense is, having listened to this committee now for a couple of months, is there actually is an evolving consensus out there. I hear it from, there's been very specific changes that you've sought, many of which are in Mr. Dexter's document, and I keep hearing from this side that they're prepared to make amendments. In its current form, exactly as it is, no, we wouldn't want C32 looking like it looks now. But in a form such as Mr. Dexter has proposed, then that's a form that I think works for everybody. And I've heard nothing from this side necessarily that I think would stop this committee from amending the document in such a way to take into account the concerns that have been raised by your group, your party, as well as the Liberal document that was published before Christmas.
I'm sorry, Mr. Henderson, because the consensus that you feel, well, at this side of the table, at least in the bloc, we don't think there's consensus. We think that the Conservative government would have to make the changes to C32 for us to allow for us to get to a consensus. Now, of course, these changes would increase or improve, if you like, the income paid to artists. Now, Ms. Davis has said that she doesn't earn much money, but we think that this bill could do something. We're talking about $136 million per year. That's a lot of money for people who are earning $15,000. So I think we're very, very, very far from a consensus with the Conservatives. And even if we... Well, for the bloc, it's very clear if the Conservative government was prepared to sit down, talk about these amendments, and to negotiate, and to provide the necessary income to artists. Of course, the bloc would be quite willing to cooperate. But unfortunately, there's no good faith being shown by the government currently. It's unfortunate. Now, the Bloc and yourself, of course, I understand that you all represent balanced copyright. That's the organization that you represent. You're all members of the board of Balanced Copyright, right? Yes, Mr. Henderson, rather, you are. Now, Mr. Dexter, you're a member of the board also?
Vous êtes aussi sur le conseil d'administration de Balanced Copyright.
On the board of Balanced Copyright, right?
One thing on that, I think an interesting thing to note about the people at this table is that this issue has actually brought us together. Prior to this, to have Mr. Henderson and myself and Mr. Dexter at a table with the same recommendations was not, I don't think it ever happened. This issue has brought us together. So what you're seeing here in Balanced Copyright is representing the people, the artists from the very first step to the major hit.
Est-ce que vous partagez tous
Now, do you all share? Do you all share the same position that Mr. Dexter's put forward in terms of the changes that need to be made to C32? Have you seen Mr. Dexter's document? Mr. Henderson, for example, have you seen his recommendations? No, you haven't seen them. Okay. So you don't know if you agree with them or not yet. Now, Mr. Dexter, perhaps, well, you seem to really know what amendments need to be made. Perhaps you could tell us whether these amendments are shared by everyone around the table, the people you're accompanied by today, and are they supported by Balanced Copyright also?
I must say, as an artist sitting here, I find, and as a taxpayer, I find it incredibly demoralizing to feel that this is one more issue in our society that is bounced around through politics. I use the word dire. We all use the word urgency. And if this should be delayed any further because of political scoring, it is deeply disturbing for those of us who are simply trying to make a living.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to move to Mr. Angus for 7 minutes.
Well, thank you. Well, glad to have you all here. I'm sorry, Ms. McKenna, your nose is out of joint on this. I think it's very important we get a bill. I've been saying that from day one. I have some concerns about how this bill is going to be implemented, and my concern is artists. So, Ms. Davies, you're new to our committee. We haven't had you before. I'm interested in, do you support the dropping of mechanical rights, mechanical royalties right now that some artists are getting from radio play?
The dropping?
Yeah, they're going to cancel that. It's worth $8 to $10 million a year.
Talking about the broadcast mechanical.
About which one?
The broadcast mechanical.
The broadcast mechanicals. That's. Have you looked at that?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
I'm not. I mean, if you would like to ask me very pointed questions about the law, you're obviously.
Oh no, sorry. I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Okay, it's not. I'm here.
I was just clarifying because this is my concern, and I know the situation's dire, but I remember touring in the early 1990s, and I was touring alongside a band that had the biggest hit in the country for about 3 years, and they were making $300 a week. So it's always been dire, and I appreciate that.
It's always been a difficult industry, but
so my question is that right now under this bill, there's two elements that would take money that would normally go to artists: the mechanical royalties that's going to be stripped, and whether or not we amend the levy. Now, Ms. McKenna says it's pocket change to her, but it's when I talk to the Copyright Board, it's $35 million a year to recording artists, touring artists.
It doesn't. I heard about this last week. I have no revenue from it.
Okay.
I have no. It's not, and I don't think that it's an. I'm not saying it's not an issue, but I'm saying how come we are delaying on so many things that we're obviously not completely in agreement.
So you don't care if the levy exists or not?
I didn't say I don't care. I just say that I would like something to happen sooner than later because I think that we're already 10 years too late.
And you're talking to an independent artist here who has no clue about the broadcast. There's so many other troubles. When you have an industry that's gone from $1.2 billion down to $420 million, and you're talking about an $8 million broadcast mechanical, you're talking about a $41 million iPod device tax, the house is on fire. And you're talking that she doesn't even know about it. Of course she doesn't, because she's trying to sell CDs and make a living live.
So your members don't rely on any of that?
You know
They
what?
don't
No
care
one
about
wants
the
to take
broadcast
money off the
mechanical?
table, but the thing we got to focus on is the bill.
Okay, no, that's fair. I'm not
No
here to
one wants
argue.
to lose any money.
I
at the
think
same
the house
time.
burnt down ages ago. I think we got to build a new house. That's my feeling. I don't think the house that.
Well, you have
existed
that
in
luxury
19
because you're not making a living from the business.
Well,
So,
I don't know if I have that luxury. It's my job to do due diligence. That's what I will do. So, Mr. Henderson, we've spoken before at committee. You had a couple of specifics that I was more interested in because last time you talked about carrot and stick and ubiquitous measure, but I didn't hear the specifics, and I was interested in two of the specifics you spoke about. One is in terms of the ISP to deal with repeat offenders. I mean, I'm hearing from your organizations about notice and takedown, but clearly the Conservatives aren't moving there because they don't think it'll pass a Canadian court challenge. So what would you suggest in terms of dealing with the ISPs to make sure that we have some kind of
Well, as I said, I think that at a very base minimum, there has to be a policy to deal with repeat infringers. I mean, if we can identify people who are, and this happens again and again and again, going back to the well, downloading Lorena's entire catalog, taking Maya's record before it's even hit the streets, and they do it over and over, at the very least, they should be doing something like that.
So is there something more specific? I mean, we haven't had the ISPs here, so we haven't heard they're telling us they're going to be good cops on this. We haven't heard what they're going to offer. Is there something specific in the bill, or you're just saying we have to push them harder?
Well, I think, there's nothing in the bill.
Right.
And what I think we're saying is there needs to be, if you look at legislation around the world, there is something in all of these legislations that deals with this issue.
Right.
Nobody should be getting a free pass.
So what's the status of the lawsuit with ISOHunt? I mean, you guys launched that in May 2010 under present copyright law. Is that going forward?
Well, this history of ISOHunt is that, I mean, they've been in Canada for a long time. They've been sued in the United States. They're subject to a gigantic court judgment, and they're kind of trying to build themselves a lifeboat, I think, up in Canada so that they can sort of escape the long arm of the law, which is something, I think, which is giving our country like a really bad reputation that they're here and starting to do that. They went to court, and I find this absolutely appalling. They went to court about a year and a half ago seeking an opinion from a British Columbia judge that what they did in Canada was legal. And my view is that we simply cannot stand idly by and allow that to happen.
So you guys are suing them, right?
So when somebody comes to your house, you're going to fight back with absolutely, and remember, Charlie, they're burning our house down. Yeah. So we're fighting back with absolutely every weapon at our disposal. And yes, did we countersue them? Sure, we countersued them. That doesn't mean that the law is going to support our countersuit.
No,
what it means is we're availing ourselves of every opportunity, and I might add, not just ourselves, but a whole host of independent labels.
Yeah, my interest here is it like, what is the status of this lawsuit now? Because ISOHunt are the main players. They're mentioned again and again, and you guys right now are the only ones.
Right. I'm not so sure. I'm not. You know, it's litigation. I mean, JP, you could talk more about that than me, but I mean, they fire a volley, you fire a volley back. These things it's like Bleak House.
Right.
It's like Charles Dickens, only it's like worse.
So, in terms of the other recommendation you'd made was on the personal uses for statutory damages, because, I'd say I'm squeamish about statutory damages because I've seen what's done in the States. But you'd had a recommendation, and I haven't heard that before. What is that recommendation?
Well, the idea is, it seems that the issue, what the government seems to be concerned about, is individuals getting dinged for millions of dollars. Yeah. Well, if that's the concern, that is actually easily addressed with the current wording, and then you just add in some discretion in the case of, personal use by an individual in their basement. The judge could actually look at that. And by the way, that's the difference between Canada and the United States, I believe. I think that there's no discretion down there. We want our judges to have discretion. Right. When I first made this point about this $5,000 cap, not being effective, I was sort of ridiculed about this on some people's blogs, saying, 5,000 sure sounds like a lot to me. And then one guy who's been talked about at this committee before was 6 teraflops, every movie ever made, and is, for his own purposes, for non-commercial purposes, making them available to the world. He went on somebody's blog and said, you know what, actually $5,000 sound like a deal to me. It might save my bacon, was his comment.
Okay, but so how do we differentiate between him and,
we're well over time.
because this is key issue.
We're going to move on to Mr. Lake for 7 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for coming today. This has been a very, very enlightening bit of testimony. I want to focus, Ms. McKenna, if I could, on some of what you said. I thought that you articulated very well the importance of passing this bill and maybe not necessarily waiting till every single thing that everybody wants is in it, because we're better off if we pass the bill than without the bill. Is that accurate?
That's exactly the sentiment. Again, as someone who has their own private enterprise, who's not just the widget, but also the owner and manager of a little company, sometimes you have to make tough decisions, and you have to say, I'm not going to win everything this time, but I need to move this train out of the station by 6 o'clock. If I do not, the train will not go, and all will be a disaster. And so I just cannot underline enough how important it is that we get the most of this done and dusted, such that it can be modified as time goes on.
And Mr. Dexter, I think, spoke to some of the, there's some technical changes that might happen. This committee process is an important part of the legislative process, because we're able to, through expert testimony from witnesses, identify places where tweaks can be made to strengthen legislation. It's a very, very important part of the process. Again, as it relates to the levy issue, I'll come back to the levy issue, but obviously there's a legitimate debate, maybe between parties or political people about the benefits or non-benefits of a levy. Again, not part of this particular bill. Should we wait till we resolve the debate on a levy before we pass this legislation?
From my perspective, on the street, on the ground, running a business, I didn't even think the levy was in the legislation or in the bill, so I don't know how it's hijacked what we're talking about. I think we need to separate the two and move forward with the bill, and we can deal with the levy after. I think everyone feels, as I said, as a small business owner, you never want to take money off the table, but at the same time, you have to direct your energies where you're going to get the most opportunity and bang for your buck, and that's on the bill right now. We can talk about the levy later. I think that's...
Okay, so speaking to what's actually in the bill, and again coming back to Ms. McKenna, what within this legislation is the most important for you as an artist and as a business person?
Well, I think the unequivocal protection for the creator's work, and that the default position be to the creator, that the difficulty of that really is the main principle, as I said in my opening remarks.
Okay.
And I think I work with hundreds and hundreds of independent artists, and they just want a choice. They want a choice of whether people confuse giving it away for free with promotion, with this, with that, with touring. They just want a choice what happens with their stuff. Some of them might want to give away to build their touring business. Some of them might want to charge 2 cents. Some of them might want to charge 10 cents. But without legislation to protect that choice, then there's no motivation to continue to make the music and to make better music and to enrich our lives. And that really, for us, comes down to the protections and the choice of what they do with their material.
And how much of it can be accomplished in permissions. As I say, we issue hundreds of permissions a year, and some of them are people's dance, some of them are churches, some of them are movies, and so it's not complex, it's actually courteous.
Well, and as an artist, I imagine that the advent of new technology and the internet and the availability of those tools to distribute your works and make your works available, they're tremendous tools for you, right? You want to be able to take advantage of those, and if we pass this legislation, you can take advantage of those and not worry that your work is just going to be distributed for free to anybody that wants it.
Graham.
Yeah.
Legislation with amendments like we've been hearing, and a lot of them are very sensible that are coming from this side of the floor, and they're coming from us. I think the key here is, could we just start talking about, okay, what is a package look like? It's very frustrating to us to see it go on, when in fact I think there's something out there. There's got to be a compromise. Most of what we're talking about here and what I keep hearing from this other side there seems to be a disconnect. The government is saying the same sort of thing. We want to get rid of wealth destroyers, okay? And as I think it was Mr. Dexter was pointing out, but the language doesn't do that. Okay, so let's just fix up the language. It's not requiring the government to make massive policy changes or to step back from the precipice. It's actually just asking the government to make the words match with the actions and the intent, right?
Right.
And I think that should be easy enough.
So based on my experience here, I wouldn't get too caught up in some of the political debate as it relates to issues, because we're going to get advice and we're going to, as a committee, work our way through this. What I would be concerned about if I was sitting at your end of the table is the time that it's taking to get through hearing all of the different ideas and getting those on the table. You know, again, there's talk of potential election. We don't know what's going to happen. Minority parliament, it can happen at any time. How critical is it for us to get this legislation passed through this parliament?
Critical. It's time now. It's time 10 years ago that you did something with this. Come to an agreement. You're smart people. Figure it out and get something that's gonna work for us, because we're desperate for real.
Time for consensus building. And we all have to be mature adults and accept that it's not going to be perfect. There are allowances in the system to continue to tweak and fine-tune things. But there must be a phase of consensus building and move this along to where we are properly protected, because the industry is in absolute shambles.
Anyone else want to?
It's directly affecting the production of music in this country, in the sense that why would somebody invest anything in a creation of a cultural product if they know that there will be very little, if any, revenue coming from it because of the lack of protection? So we're seeing on a daily basis that people are not recording at the same rate they used to, which affects the recording studios, which affects the sound techs and the lighting techs and the performance guys, everything.
And which ultimately affects us as Canadian consumers who want good quality product out there to listen to and to watch and to read and all of those things.
And
revenue and taxes.
And as citizens who are proud of our cultural output, why would I'm giving a speech tomorrow at my old college, music college. Why would I tell any single one of them to ever follow any of their dream or any of their art the way that I have? If I already had a few in a million chance and they have zero of ever making this a real career.
Our artists
What's
are
the point?
a huge part of what brand Canada is. I mean, countries are always looking to differentiate themselves from other countries. There's a mass competition. We buy German goods because, well, we know made in Germany means it's Canada. When people think about Canada around the world, they think of people like Lorena and Mai. It's a huge component of brand Canada. I don't think we take enough cognizance of that. I don't think we do enough to protect them. I don't think we care enough. And this legislation, coupled with sensible, reasonable changes, will, I think, provide the market framework that will enable people like Maya and Lorena and JP's, grassroots, the people with a guitar and a song on the way in the front door. We talk about made in Canada solutions. Well, nothing's going to get made in Canada if we don't fix this up and impose some rules on the marketplace. We love the new technologies. We love them. But we need to have some rules.
All right, thank you very much. That's going to have to be the last word. So thank you to our witnesses, and we will briefly suspend. All right, we're going to call this 15th meeting of the Special Legislative Committee on Bill C32 to order. We have 4 groups: the Association Québécoise de l'Industrie du Disque, du Spectacle et de la Vidéo, the Guilde des Musiciens et Musiciennes du Québec, and the Society of Composers, Authors, and Music Publishers of Canada, as well as the Songwriters Association of Canada. And each of those 4 groups will have 5 minutes. So we will start with the ADISQ. So they're not here. So we'll move. Oh, yes, they are. Okay. Solange Drouin for 5 minutes. No? Oui.
OK.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, on behalf of the ADISQ, I'd like to thank you for having asked us to appear here before you today. The ADISQ has signed the joint statement on Bill C32. This was signed by 80 groups from the Canadian cultural industry. Several of them have already appeared before you and have shared with you the many concerns that they have about C32, which would deprive creators of content to the tune of more than $125 million. We share these concerns. We can't cover everything in 5 minutes, so we've chosen to give you an overview and to try to have you understand that this bill, C32, is central to the development, the survival, and the diversity of our Canadian cultural expressions. First of all, a couple of words on the organization that I represent. The ADISQ is a professional association which brings together independent producers from the performing arts, video arts, and recording arts in Quebec. These producers are responsible for more than 95% of artists' albums in Quebec. This means that the share of major labels is very low in terms of local production in Quebec. The artist career development is basically based on an independent industry made up of small corporations, small companies. In terms of sales results by Quebec artists on their own market, it's quite surprising. Year over year, more than 50% of CDs sold in Quebec are by Quebec artists. Now, this favourable position in terms of Quebec artists' sales has led to the creation of a favourable climate for the sustainable development of artists and entrepreneurs. This has also allowed Canadians to have access to a great wealth and diversity of music. It's also led to the emergence of a large number of artists that are excellent ambassadors throughout the world. This is a great situation. However, it hides several problems. It hides the fact that although the share of Quebec artists in terms of total sales remains high, the total volume of sales has gone down drastically over the past few years. In Quebec, we have seen a drop of 13 million albums sold in 2004 to a little over 9 million in 2010. This is a decrease of some 30% in 6 years. Throughout Canada, the situation is just as alarming, and even more so. Unfortunately, it's not different on the world scale. According to the IFPI, this means that in terms of the top 50 sellers, 77% of fewer initial albums were released between 2003 and 2010. Developing artists are the first victims of this dramatic trend downwards, and also the public is a major loser in this. Surprisingly, at the same time, music has never been as present in people's lives. The ways of getting it legally and illegally are numerous, and companies are developing business models based on music without a significant return to the purveyors of the content. Why am I saying this to you today when we're talking here about copyright? Well, copyright is an economic style piece of legislation. It sets the rules which allow copyright holders to be paid when their creations are used. in terms of your decisions and your choices, well, you are able to create an even more critical situation than one we currently experience. Or you can turn things around to allow sufficient income to enable Canadian artists to provide Canadian content to Canadians. There has to be a piece of legislation that works well. Now, Bill C32 fails to do this. The challenge is major, but however, it can be overcome when there is political will. In France, for example, that's a good example of this tenacity and this will. It's just one example of many. France recently reviewed the amount of levies for private use on USBs, on memory cards, on hard disks. It's also thinking about setting a levy on iPads. Here we're talking about ways of paying levies on MP3s. Why is this the case? I'd like to understand why the Conservative government, which is often the defender of small companies, private companies, is not protecting cultural private enterprise also. We should not forget that culture is based on small companies. Now, the Guild of Musicians in Quebec, 5 minutes. My name is Luc Fortin. I'm president of the Guilde des Musiciens et Musiciennes du Québec. I'm also a professional musician. I'm also accompanied by Mr. Eric Lefebvre, who's the secretary-treasurer of our association, as my colleague just said, we also signed this joint document. The Guild is an association of artists which brings together more than 3,500 professional musicians from throughout Quebec. It's also affiliated to the Canadian Federation of Musicians, and its mission is to defend and promote the economic interests, the social, moral, and professional interests of musicians. The first thing I have to do is to really indicate our position on Bill C32. If there are no major amendments, this bill should not be adopted. The government has provided specific new rights to performers, such as the moral right and also soul rights provided for by the OMPI Treaty. Therefore, this puts performers on an equal footing with the rights enjoyed by other artists. But what the legislator gives with the right hand, it takes away with the left hand. What would this sole right be used for if ISPs are not held to account? How can we protect our copyright rights on recordings when radio stations and teaching institutions are able to reproduce this without paying a levy? There is a huge number of exceptions provided to users. This really undermines the sole rights that have been given to holders. I think we have to say that the notion of fair dealing has been extended to education. There's also been an exception for the recording of television shows for time-shifting purposes. There are other situations also that we have to deal with. Now, the Berne Convention provides for an exception in special cases that should not breach the normal copyright of holders' rights. This is Section 9. Bill C32 does not respect the Berne Convention because it provides for several exceptions which will deprive performers of payment and thus breaching their rights. In terms of ISPs now, the government is indeed proposing a series of TPMs. However, major producers we call them the majors in our business, are often those that have the measures, the means available to them to implement these TPMs, but they're very unpopular, so they don't do so. iTunes, for example, 2 years ago, withdrew all these TPMs from its catalog, its online catalog. In the private use system, which allows authors to be compensated for any violation of their rights, this is to disappear. Who produces music today on cassettes? No one. CDs will suffer the same fate. Music is reproduced on millions of iPods and things of this type. Levies to creators are paid on other supports, which are all disappearing. Canadians are being told that this private use levy is a tax, but it's not really. It's a measure, a compensation measure, which is designed to tackle a previously illegal behavior. Now, artists' works are crucial for the commercialization of a recording and also for the commercialization of a film or a TV show. It's time for the legislature to meet this demand, which has been recognized in several other countries. Now, to conclude, if you adopt C32, Canada will become one of the countries that fails to protect creation and innovation, which are part of intellectual property. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. We'll now move to the Society of Composers, Authors, and Music Publishers of Canada. We have three representatives, Mr. Spurgeon, Mr. Davies, and Mr. Valaquette. So for a total of 5 minutes, you have the floor.
Monsieur le Président, Mesdames...
Mr. Chair, members, hello. I'm Gilles Valaquette. I'm a composer from Quebec. I'm representing here today the Society of Composers, Authors and Music Publishers of Canada, SOCAN. I'm currently a member of the SOCAN Board of Directors, which I previously chaired for 5 years. I'm joined by Mr. Victor Davis, who is also a composer and a SOCAN director. Also, Mr. Paul Sturgeon, who is SOCAN's Vice President, Legal Services and General Counsel. Mr. Chairman, Bill C32 is very important to us. To appreciate this, you must consider that SOCAN collectively administers the performing rights in music and lyrics on behalf of our over 35,000 active Canadian members and members of affiliated similar societies from around the world. This being said, it must be stressed that the songwriter who toils for days and weeks to create a new work does not get paid up front for his labour. The Copyright Act, on the other hand, calls for a royalty to be paid to the artist when and only when his song is actually being used. In other words, my colleagues and I are entrepreneurs, except that instead of building furniture or cars, we build songs. We take risks on the understanding that we will be paid when someone uses our works. That's the agreement we have with our customers. You must understand that SOCAN cannot support Bill C32 as currently drafted simply because it does not respect that agreement. In the interest of national unity, Bill C32 must respect both of Canada's legal traditions and intellectual property matters, copyright and droit d'auteur. More specifically, the law must ensure that Canadians can access our works while respecting their creators' rights of remunerations. As currently drafted, Bill C32 fails to reflect the fundamental rights that are the cornerstone of copyright protection in Canada. Let us not forget that Bill C32 is about intellectual property. As owner, Mr. Chairman and members of Parliament, thank you for this opportunity to express my views directly to you as a creator and artist. I would ask you to make the amendments we are proposing in our submission in order to ensure that creators' rights are respected and that the music industry can grow. Thanks very much. I'll now move on to, I'll give the floor to Mr. Paul Sturgeon.
Paul Spurgeon, and I'm SOCAN's General Counsel.
I understand you have a copy of SOCAN's 16-page November 19th submission. Also, I've left with the clerk a copy of a document called the WIPO Study on Limitations and Exceptions, which I think you'll find very interesting, especially if you refer to pages 74 to 80. It might help in your understanding of the issue of exceptions and limitations. And also, I've left with you a copy of a 4-pager on the 3-step test, which I'm going to principally speak to in my brief remarks. On the last page of our submission, we propose that Clause 41 be amended by adding the following interpretation provision. Simple provision. It says, in interpreting any limitation or exception in copyright under Part 3 of the Act, the Court shall ensure that such limitations or exceptions are 1. Confined to certain special cases, 2. Do not conflict with the normal exploitation of the work, and 3. Do not unreasonably prejudice the legitimate interests of the author, including the author's right to equitable remuneration. I got to point out that this amendment is simply based on the 3-step test that Canada has already agreed to in international treaties and has ratified and intends to ratify, including the Berne Convention, which we've been a signatory to for decades, the World Trade Organization Treaty, and the WIPO treaties, which you are about to hopefully implement and ratify when C32 is enacted. Since Canada has already agreed to this 3-step test in these treaties, there's no reason why it should not be included in the Copyright Act. Thank you. Victor?
Sorry. Yes, my name is Victor Davies. I'm a music composer, and I serve on the SOCAN Board of Directors. As Gilles mentioned, SOCAN represents music composers, authors, and publishers. Please note we do not represent record companies, and they do not represent us. I would like to discuss 2 issues, digital locks and exceptions. First of all, we respect the right of other copyright owners to use digital locks to protect their works if they so desire. However, SOCAN's business model is not based on blocking access with digital locks. Instead, SOCAN's mandate is to provide access to the world's music repertoire and to collect royalties determined by the Copyright Board for these uses. Therefore, although digital locks may help some copyright owners, they do not directly help SOCAN. Secondly, we oppose Bill C32's many exceptions because they allow users to use our valuable intellectual property, but we do not get paid.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off there because you're well over.
Okay, sorry. Thank
you. You'll get an opportunity to answer questions. We'll move to the Songwriters Association of Canada, Jim Valance and Greg Johnson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you for this opportunity. These are challenging times for creators and rights holders, and we appreciate the work you've done and continue to do on the bill. My name is Jim Valance. I'm Vice President of the Songwriters Association of Canada. I'm a multiple Juno Award winner and a member of the Order of Canada. I've composed music for hundreds of performers, including Anne Murray, Paul Anka, Tina Turner, Bryan Adams, and Ozzy Osbourne. My songs have sold more than 100 million copies worldwide. This was possible because my career largely occurred in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, the decades before Napster. Given the state of the industry in 2011, it's unlikely the next generation of Canadian songwriters will have the same opportunities that I had. In fact, much of our industry could disappear as music creators are forced to seek other employment to make ends meet. The loss to Canadian culture could be incalculable. No more Shania Twains, no more Luc Plamondons. Let me digress for a moment. For the better part of 100 years, British Columbia had a prosperous commercial fishing industry. Suddenly, a few years ago, the salmon failed to materialize. The consequences were devastating. Jobs were lost, fishermen were bankrupted, boats were sold. The scientists at the Department of Fisheries were baffled, unable to explain the anomaly. Quite simply, the fish were gone and no one knew why or where. The music industry is experiencing a similarly devastating crisis, each year worse than the last. But unlike the fishing industry, we don't need to consult scientists. We know where our songs are. Every minute of every day, millions of our songs are being shared online. Never in history has music been so popular or so accessible. This should be a golden era for the music industry. Sadly, the opposite is true. 95% of the time, our music is shared without compensation for creators or rights holders. Meanwhile, ISPs reap significant profits, providing access to our music over their networks. During the past decade, consumers have demonstrated an overwhelming preference for accessing music online. Attempts by governments worldwide to stop or alter this behavior have proven futile and ineffective. We must accept this fact because only then can we move forward. As gatekeepers to the world's repertoire of music, ISPs must share revenues with those of us who create and own the content they deliver to their customers. Creators, rights holders, and the ISPs must work together as partners rather than adversaries. Songwriters are not arts groups. We are self-employed entrepreneurs, proud professionals. We don't want government funding. We want a fair and legal marketplace for our music. We propose a made-in-Canada solution where individuals who wish to share music online pay a reasonable monthly license fee for the private, non-commercial sharing of music. We seek a viable business model for the digital age where consumers, our fans, can continue accessing music online while creators and rights holders are fairly compensated.
My name is Greg Johnson. I'm a songwriter and the treasurer of the Songwriters Association of Canada. I'm a 40-year-old. I have a wife, 2 kids, a car, and I live in downtown Toronto. I volunteer, shop for groceries, pay taxes, and I vote. I studied music at both Simon Fraser University and Grant MacEwan College. I had student loans and I paid them off. I picked a career, I was educated for it, and I'm really good at what I do. I've worked with artists such as Olivia Newton-John, Mark Jordan, Ron Sexsmith, Hawksley Workman, and Nick Lachey, to name a few. Unlike my friend and colleague, Mr. Valance, my songs have not sold over 100 million copies. And unless drastic measures are taken, songwriters of my generation will never have the chance. In fact, despite my education, talent, and success, I may have no choice but to leave the profession entirely. Some may say that's life, something I would be willing to accept, but for the fact that our songs have never been more popular. They're on your radio when you drive to work, they encourage you on the treadmill, they play at your daughter's wedding, they help sell shoes, toothpaste, life insurance, they've even helped the odd political campaign. The solution to our industry's dilemma lies in the monetization of music file sharing. To reiterate Jim Valance, a mutually beneficial partnership with the ISPs would allow consumers access to our work in the way they are now accustomed to. Rights holders would be remunerated, success would be rewarded, and fair business practice would be restored. To this end, Bill C32 has nothing to offer. Bill C32, as written, opens the doors to years of lawsuits in regard to the definition of fair dealing. The last decade has been a period of rapid decline for our industry. Forcing music creators to, in essence, sue for their supper only increases our financial hardship and solves none of the basic problems we face. Digital locks and lawsuits, as well as other repressive measures, are a well-worn path at this point and have proven to largely be a dead end. We at the SAC support the private copy levy as a part of a comprehensive plan to remunerate music creators for our work. The levy, while helpful to creators, is not in and of itself a comprehensive solution and should not be seen as such. But with blank CD sales declining annually and Bill C32's failure to extend the levy to devices like the iPod, this legislation offers little hope for our future. In conclusion, we at the SAC are grateful for this opportunity to appear before the committee and sincerely hope our input will be helpful in amending this crucial legislation so that it may foster an enlightened and profitable Canadian music industry. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We'll now move to questioning. We have 21 minutes remaining, and with the consent of the committee, we'll have 5-minute rounds. Is there consent? Okay. Mr. Rodriguez for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Bonjour. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. Le gouvernement, j'ai écouté le gouvernement.
I've listened to my colleagues from the government, and they said earlier, though perhaps the bill's not perfect, but it could be passed as it stands, and we could make changes after the fact. While I'm concerned by that approach, because in my opinion, these are not minor changes that are required here, but really major changes. Once again, in my opinion, the bill is imbalanced to the detriment of creators. There's a loss of income, a loss of rights. It doesn't do the job, in short. Now, each of you, I'd like you to tell me if this bill was not amended, if you had the choice between adopting it as it stands currently or not adopting it, should it go through or not? Well, in terms of our analysis of the situation of the bill, it'd be better without it than with it. That goes without saying. If the changes are not made, the amendments are not made, well, no, it shouldn't be passed. Of course, the situation in the music industry is catastrophic, but this bill would do nothing. It would make it worse, in fact. Mr. Fortin. Well, we also think that it would be better to maintain the status quo than passing this bill in its current form. It wouldn't be an improvement, it would even be a loss for the whole of the industry, the whole of the music industry and creators. So for the music industry, you're talking about it being a step backwards, not even maintaining the status quo. Mr. Variquet.
The bill needs work.
No, we all agree on that.
And it needs probably considerable work, not just for the music industry. There are other sectors in the copyright and the creative industries that are impacted by the bill. So it's not just the music industry.
Okay, but if there's no amendment as is?
We need amendments.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I agree. Mr. Davies or Johnson or Geka?
With all the previous speakers, we need amendments, and the three-step test is a major component of that, in my view.
Okay, yeah, Mr. Valens?
Briefly, amendments first, bill second.
Okay, so you all agree the bill needs major amendments. So we all agree on that. What should be the main amendments? Without going into details, because there's so many things to amend, I agree, but maybe one, two things.
The thrust of what I said, the three-step test, is important because the government has created over 40 exceptions, brand new exceptions and limitations. And it's created a couple of rights, one for photographers and a few other rights, but essentially it's an exception and limitation bill. Okay, so it's an exception and limitation bill, so let's make sure we can provide judges with guidance so that when they interpret those exceptions and limitations, they know what they're doing. And the three-step test will give judges that guidance, which they wouldn't have because it's not in the law. It's in a treaty, but as the lawyers here know, it has to be a self-executing treaty.
Autre rapidement.
The others, quickly. Well, I listened to the presentation by Mr. Valiquette, and he demonstrated very clearly, and also my other colleagues like Luc Fortin, for example, they demonstrated that the music industry is made up of small companies, both artists and labels. We're all working on a small scale, and as I said in my presentation that I wasn't able to finish, we don't see why these small cultural industries would not receive the same attention as other industries where it's made up mainly of small companies. Now we want you to look at this from this perspective. Now one of the major amendments that need to be made here, well, currently we're facing the podcast mechanical right. That's a right that we lose. That represents $8 to $9 million less in income in terms of levies. And there's also the private use copy. I gave the example of France, for example. France is even thinking about imposing levies on iPads. Now, here in Canada, we're saying no levies on anything. I can't understand that. I fail to understand it. Very quickly, I think I have how much time left? 20 seconds. 40? Let's deal on this. Now, very quickly, on terms of the responsibility of ISPs, for example, do you think that this bill does the job or not? No. In 5 seconds, no. Does anybody think it does the job? Okay. Thanks very much, Mr. Rodriguez. Mr. Cardin, 5 minutes. No, it's Ms. Lavallée. Okay. She's pinch hitting. He's very happy. He's very kind, so he's giving me his speaking time today. Now, first of all, I'd just like to say that I'm surprised to see so many witnesses here. We had agreed, well, the committee decided to have 3 witnesses only, so that gave a reasonable amount of time for you to give reasonable answers. I'm very surprised by seeing so many witnesses here today. Now, I would like each of you to say that if you think you need more time to put forward your positions, please don't hesitate to ask the clerk to allow you to come back. And I'm sure that this will be accepted. Now, to come back to the topic we're dealing with here today, I said earlier there are too many witnesses. One of the witnesses cancelled at the last minute. Now, we've seen from your statements, really, that you all share a common position. You all come from music industry. Now, the difference between the earlier panel and your panel, well, the earlier panel represented radio, the Canadian Council of Music and Industry Association, for example, the Canadian recording industry. Mr. Henderson represents radio stations, multinationals, really, you're saying. Okay, thank you for that correction. But anyway, they see that C32 covers a lot of their demands. Now, artists, these are the people you represent. On the other hand, you're saying that you are going to lose through this bill. We're saying up to $126 million. Private use copy, for example, $30 million. Now, the content generated by users, UGCs, in France, for example, the CSM, which is an association of songwriters, they succeeded in negotiating with YouTube to get levies paid on UGCs. Now, this would be impossible if we provide this exemption as is provided for in the current bill. Now, take your time here, and you can always come back, of course, as I've said. What are the amendments here? What are the amendments that are the most important to you? We'll start in order. Ms. Drouin, you go first. Well, I think I've answered in part this question. When I answered Mr. Rodriguez's question, I'd just like to put everything in perspective here. The music industry that was there before us, well, I think that we agree on many things. We agree on more things than we differ on. For us, this bill, as it currently stands, is not sufficient, is not adequate. We're not saying that we don't want a bill. Of course, we're not saying that. If you're asking us whether it should be passed in its current state, we would say no, of course. But should we have amendments to the copyright bill? Of course there should be. We agree with that. Well, look, now, the amendments to the Act that need to be made currently, well, is everything that is covered by the WIPO Convention. There should also be a sole right for public use. Now, this is a sole right that's provided to producers to authorize or not the access to public using digital means. This is very important. This needs to be recognized as a right for us. So, as Gilles Valiquette said, because we really want to do business in the digital world, but we have to have the tools that we need to do this. We don't want this bill to take away tools from us. We want it to provide us with tools so that we can come to agreements with people like YouTube and iTunes, for example. So this right, really, for us, is very important. We have to have it. And I think this is really in line with the WIPO Treaty that we signed in 1990. That's not been ratified by Canada yet. Mr. Lefebvre, well, first of all, while extending private copy use levies to all supports, all methods here, well, that's very important here. We're not just talking about CDs, we're not just talking about cassettes, we're talking about MP3s, perhaps there'll be new apparatus available in the future, so it has to be, it has to apply to all these new inventions. Now, there was a previous iteration of C32, and at that time we talked about a fragile balance between user rights and also right holder rights. Now, this fragile balance has been broken by the exceptions that have been included in this bill. I think we have to maintain the status quo on the exceptions that currently exist. This will allow us to negotiate rates or agreements with users. Now, currently, the number of exemptions provided in this bill means that the fragile balance that has existed since 1966 is broken. Mr. Angus.
For coming today. I guess I'm at the outset. I have to say I'm a little lost because we just had a panel primarily led by CREA, which represents Warner, Sony, Universal, EMI, the four largest entertainment industries in the world, and we had Maple, which is with Universal, and they told us they represented music and musicians across Canada, and they were speaking with one voice. And I see the songwriters, I see SOCAN, I see EDISC, I see the Guild of Musicians. So who do you speak for?
I guess you... Mais, non, allez-y, là.
On représente tous.
Well, we all represent the music industry at different levels. The ADISQ is more at the level of music production. We have songwriters. We represent the Canadian music industry as a whole. Perhaps you misunderstood what I said at the outset. Now, the multinationals, the majors on the Quebec market, well, they're not really there. Now, the independent producers we representing Quebec account for 95% of albums published or marketed in Quebec. Yeah, in Quebec, the weight of the majors is minimal. And they're happy with that. They're happy with distributing foreign content. That's what they do.
Breaks between the multinational labels and the independents and songwriters, but I was very struck because they were very clear that this idea of the levy was absurd. The house was burning down. I mean, there was so much smoke coming up from the table, and we had to pass this bill immediately. And Mr. Dexter said, we have a $400 million industry at stake. And I was doing the math. You know, I'm kind of slow at math. I got 52 in grade 10. You can put that on my next attack ad. But I did the math, and I thought, well, if we got a $400 million industry, and I'm asking about money that's being taken off the table. So the mechanical royalties are $8+ million. The digital levy, according to the Copyright Board, is $35+ million. So I'm looking at people who are saying that their industry is in such a dire strait that they're willing to give up 12 to 13 to 15% of their annual income just to get this bill passed. Mr. Fortin, you and I were in Washington together at the Future of Music Coalition. We met with musicians from across North America. What we've heard from the record industry, and my conservative colleagues love this, is if we increase the statutory damages and we put digital locks, we'll be in the promised land. But I didn't see in the United States musicians feeling that their situation was any better than ours. And yet we have a situation here where there's compensation for artists, direct compensation, and that is being taken off the table in this bill. Why do you think this bill should be allowed to go ahead if the compensation to artists that was been guaranteed under copyright is one of the things that will be stripped?
Well, as we've all said today, what it also says in this document signed by about 80 cultural associations throughout Canada, well, we can't think that a bill in the future will improve the protection of composers if it doesn't cover new technologies such as iPad, for example. It goes without saying. This is presented as a tax. Everybody knows that it's a levy, not a tax. Now, Canadians make a difference between levies and taxes. Even you yourself, Mr. Angus, you participated in discussions on the radio, on open line programs, when you explained that money goes to artists. Well, people understand that it's not a tax in that case. A tax goes to the government. We don't know what they do with it exactly, but with a levy, you know where it goes and who gets it and why they get it. Well, this isn't what I see Creo saying. They're not our enemies, of course. Of course they're not. What they've said, really, is that they want to set aside some irritants to focus on the most important parts of the bill, that's to say specific provisions, and we share their position. Korea's position. Well, we're saying that we have to get rid of the issue of levies and we have to pass the bill. Now, we're saying that we'll set it aside. We'll talk about it later. We're not saying we're going to accept not to talk about it, agree not to talk about it.
He stated clearly, Mr. Henderson stated that he opposed the creator groups.
Mr. Angus, you're well over, so Mr. Del Mastro.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'm going to have enough time to share some of my time with Mr. Bernier. So I just come out initially with a bit of a statement. It seems to me that artists, record producers, people right across the country are split into two groups on this, and this, I think, goes back to Mr. Angus's point. There's groups that believe that by reestablishing a marketplace that you will drive income, opportunity, and investment into the record industry, and you will save the record industry. That's what we heard from the first panel. And then there's those that say, you can't rebuild an industry, there will never be an industry, so the only way that we can do it is if we slap fees and levies on things. And by the way, a tax or a levy, it's the same thing. It's a fee placed on consumers. It's exactly the same thing. And ultimately, if you pay a tax, it goes to health care. People know where taxes go. It goes to health care, it goes to education, people understand that. But people do reject paying higher taxes, even though they know that it's going to wind up in health care and education and defense spending and foreign affairs and all sorts of things. People know that that's where their tax dollars go. They just object to paying more when it's impacting on their household. You know, I think there's a very simple, and I'm just going to put this out there, and then I'm going to pass off to Mr. Bernier. But I mean, if we have a retailer, say we have a bakery and it sells bread, and people go in and rather than paying for it, they're just taking it off the shelf and walking out the door. Well, we have a law against that. It's called shoplifting. And we say, no, you may not do this. And people that come in and just take it are charged. But it seems that the contrary approach for intellectual property, and that's a property just like anything else, the contrary approach, we believe we can reestablish a marketplace. $971 million have been wiped out of the film industry. $750 million has been wiped out of the recording industry. So between the film industry and the recording industry, almost $2 billion. That's got to be close to 20,000 jobs in Canada that don't exist. So what we're saying is, if somebody comes in and takes something, we're going to wipe out the enablers. The top 5 pirate sites in the world are operating in Canada. We're going to shut them down. That's the intent of this bill, so that people then go back to the marketplace and buy things. We don't go to the bakery and say, no, we're just going to let people keep it on taking bread, and we're just going to charge a levy somewhere else to reimburse you for the bread that people are just taking. And secondly, we certainly wouldn't say to them, oh, by the way, I noticed that you made a sandwich with that bread. We're going to need an extra 15 cents because you've just shifted the format. I'll pass the rest of my time to Mr. Bernier.
Sandwich tax.
Merci.
Thanks very much. I have a question for Mr. Lefebvre. I'd like you to give us more details on the fragile balance between the rights of users and the rights of copyright holders. You said that in previous legislation this right was created. You said that this bill breaks it. Well, in terms of time shifting, the time shifting for TV shows, it's clear really that the reproduction is provided. It's like a private use copy, but without levies, if you like, for rights holders. For example, teaching institution, there's a for fee license that's paid for use for radio shows, for TV shows. Now, this license had to be paid for. This license has been abolished. These are a couple of examples that show that the bill in its current state, well, there were fees or levies that were paid, and now there are exceptions that are being proposed. Well, I think that there'll be a lot of levies that will be lost, and this money will not be redistributed rather to rights holders. These levies are not used just for management companies. They're also used to fund songwriters and artists in general, if you like. Well, I'd like to react to what Mr. Del Mastro said. If this is an industry like any other industry in Canada, let's talk about the baking industry, for example. Well, you don't say that industry will pay for white bread, but not for brown bread, for example. There's no exception made by the government. Now, in terms of this current legislation, well, it states, well, in such and such a situation, you'll be able to buy the bread or get the bread free. This is what has happened through the addition of these exceptions. So you're increasing the number of times that leading consumers won't have to pay for their music. Now, there are the education exceptions for university institutions, for example. So you're against this exception, right? Well, as a principle, I would say the following. I don't understand, really, when we recognize someone's rights, why you would withdraw this right for specific uses, as if you didn't trust them, if you didn't trust the rights holders, as if you were saying, well, you're not being reasonable, you're not being reasonable in terms of the use of your work. You're saying, well, this is for educational purposes. It has to be acceptable to both parties. Both parties should be able to negotiate an agreement. It's almost like a trade agreement. A commercial agreement has to satisfy both parties. In Quebec, the example of Quebec, something I know well, the Ministry of Education in Quebec pays levies for the use of works used in a school setting. We came to an agreement with the ministry. It didn't ruin or bankrupt the ministry, in fact, but they understood that it was a way of strengthening the education system, and youth have to understand that when they want to use something, they have to pay for it. Now, in terms of exceptions as a principle, well, I don't really agree with it. I think we're big enough or we're adult enough to really come to agreements on our own.
The meeting is now adjourned.